Okay. So I'll give you an idea of my audience. So I know you've been on a lot of entrepreneurship podcasts and a lot of that, which makes sense. I have a little bit of a mix, but mostly families that listen. Okay.
Okay.
So my questions, well, actually, let me ask you, because I'm guessing you don't, I have no idea. I kind of Googled your name. I put family in, I put wife, I put kids. I have no idea. So
Yeah.
before we even like start asking you questions about family stuff, do you have kids?
Oh, yes. Yes. I have a 25-year-old son and a 21-year-old daughter, and I've been married for 28 years.
20. Are you comfortable talking about that at all?
Yeah,
Or
I love the topic of family.
okay,
Because it's so, yeah, there's so many places that you could go with that.
exactly. And you said 25-year-old son, and how old your daughter?
21
Okay,
on
perfect.
21 on the 7th.
28 years married. Nice. All right, sweet. So there we go. That's good. I mean, you must keep it kind of private. I mean, unless there's just no articles about it, because I really looked and digged a little bit. Couldn't find
Interesting.
them.
Yeah, I never really thought about talking about it so much,
Yeah.
but it isn't because I'm private about it,
Yeah.
really.
Well, I think you just
Yeah.
deal with a lot more of the business aspect of things,
Yeah,
probably.
I think that's true.
So maybe we could throw you for a loop today.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about it. I don't, hopefully I got something to share. We'll see.
Yeah. Well,
If
I
it's
have.
boring, you can edit it out.
No, we'll be good. I have some couple of business questions, but for the most part, we'll just roll with the conversation. All right. So right before I was on here, I was actually on your Instagram. I saw you got a tattoo back in October, which
I
is great.
did. We don't do the posting on Instagram so much.
It's
We're
fine.
more active on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Twitter, yeah, I saw that.
But yes, I did get a tattoo. It was a long journey.
Well, I want to ask you about that, but we'll go.
Okay.
First
Okay.
thing I want to
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
is the first question I ask everybody, Rob,
Yeah.
and I'll do an intro later, so don't worry about that.
Yeah. Okay.
Do a pretty intro for it. Is today in your life, and I'm interested. We talked just briefly before this, and you have a 25-year-old son, a 21-year-old daughter. You've been married for 28 years. You work with a lot of companies and businesses. When you wake up today in the morning, what really makes your heart just jump out of your chest? What makes your heart really sing every morning that you wake up?
Mm. Well, that's a good question. Um, I think it's different on different days. I do have a practice which I learned actually this past year in 2019 from Thumpton Jinpa, who is the translator for the Dalai Lama. And he talked to me about when he gets up in the morning and setting an intention before he gets up. And I've started that practice inspired by him. And so each day it may take on a different quality, but whatever that intention is, I would imagine that is what makes my heart pump.
Would you mind sharing a couple of recent intentions that you
Sure.
had?
Some might be around, well, let's say this past couple of weeks have been very family oriented, which sometimes is good. Sometimes can be, riddled with some anxiety in my family. And so I had a lot of intention setting over the last couple of weeks around genuine love and unconditional love and patience, lessons that are important for me to remind myself about.
That's beautiful. That's so cool. That's it's so weird you say that, because I literally was just writing an article now about unconditional love,
Oh,
and
wow.
and you were the first person to ever use that term in any of my interviews. So
Oh, wow.
that's like literally right before we came on. I was writing stuff about it. So that's cool. That's
That
awesome.
is cool.
And what is since this is Mindful Impact podcast, what is your meditation today look like?
Well, I have a practice in the morning, which is 45 minutes,
Oh,
and then in the evening, which is 20. I always like to preface that by saying, the length, I think, isn't what's important to be focused on. I know when I say 45 minutes, for some people, they think, oh, wow, like I could never do that. And then I don't ever want people to have a sense that for them to take on a successful meditation practice, that it needs to have that amount of time. It's just what works for me. So I always would want to encourage people to just try to find what works for you, because we're all so different, and it's all different for all of us.
Yeah.
So that's what it looks like for me. And I do a focused breath, a focused attention breath meditation is the type that I practice. And each morning or each time I sit down to practice, I remind myself why I'm doing this. There are times, even to this day, where I sit down and I think, why exactly am I doing this right now? I am so busy. I don't have time, et cetera. So I've made it also a practice, which I've learned many, many, many years ago, which is just to remind myself why I'm doing this. And I'm sitting to be a better person. And when I feel better personally, I'm a better person to those around me. Yeah. And this is an important thing that I need to do today. And so that's one of the parts of my practice.
I love that you said, why am I doing this? Because that's been creeping up personally for me the past month or two. Like, why am I doing this? And then I have to remind myself why. And out of all the times I've asked that question, that has never been come up yet. That's so cool. Yeah, that's so interesting. So why you do it? Why are you meditating every day? And that's now, what time, I'm curious for people listening and myself too, actually, what time do you get up so you can get 45 minutes in? Because obviously you have other stuff you have to do in the morning.
Yeah, I get up at 4:45.
Okay. Which means you go to bed at what time?
I try to be asleep or in bed around 8:30 or 9, and then hopefully sleep by 9:30 or 10. I do a little reading beforehand.
Nice. What are you reading right now, if you don't mind me asking?
I just read Michael Pollan's book on hallucinogenics, and I can't remember the exact name of it. That's actually. Good. And now I'm reading a book by Mark Bertolini, who is the CEO of Aetna, and it's about purpose-driven leadership.
Purpose-driven leadership. Yeah. Nice. So so what's really cool about you saying that is you teach leadership, right? Of course, you have your retreats, you work with businesses, and you're also continuing to read and learn more about it, right? Yes. I mean, that's what we have. I just want to make that point as people, listening to this, right?
You can't ever stop. I mean, the philosophies keep getting deeper, and there's new ideas and new stuff out there all the time. There's so many, and with the way we're connected nowadays, there's so many people who are thoughtful about leadership and so many different ideas around it. And it's also fascinating, and so I can't get enough of it because, as you say, you have to, from my standpoint, I feel I need to continually be growing.
Yeah. Rob, what do you find more is coming? What do you find like some new trends or new topics and ideas are coming into leadership the past year or so?
Well, certainly around, especially large businesses, say like enterprise, like Fortune 500 type size companies. Something that I think is interesting is a lot of CEOs are talking more about to their shareholders about, let us make some long-term decisions. Stop judging us on our quarterly results. Now, I have a small business, so I don't that's not my world. We're a privately held company, and I don't have those kinds of pressures. But I like that I'm reading that. I like that companies and CEOs are kind of saying, like, we're having a hard time planning for the future when you're pressuring us to have certain types of results in the next 90 days. And then what that's doing is it's degrading our company's culture, because it's all about the people. And when you are a Fortune 500 company, you have tens of thousands of employees. And what they're doing is they're having a less, a type of experience in life that is less desirable than you would want, because there's a pressure that's coming down from the top, and then they can't do their best work. And so let the companies plan for the future appropriately. Let them create a culture that is a lifter up kind of culture, so that people could do their best work, and then you will be rewarded with great results, and the shareholders will all be happy.
How are you seeing, I mean, if that's really interesting, because everything I've always read in the past is that short term, the shareholders want to see that. How are they are you seeing how they're reacting to that by any chance?
Mostly not great. I mean, some people think that the CEOs are posturing so they don't have the pressure that they have to deal with all the time. Because the shareholders are focused on now, and they want their returns now.
Right.
So it's mostly not positive, which is sort of a bummer. But many of the shareholders are often not like say I own some stock in a company. Like, I'm nothing. These are institutional shareholders, and so they have they have their own set of pressures, which is why it's trickling over to their investments. So, but I think the CEO's hearts are in the right places, and I do think it's what's best for the companies in the long term.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting to think about. And I mean, I know it doesn't relate completely, because they're dealing with a lot of money and a lot of pressure. But when something's been the same exact way for years and years and years, right? Like, change is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
People get upset. They don't like it. So it'd be really cool if this actually broke through to the other side in the near future.
Mm-hmm. It would be.
Yeah. And the stockholders realize, well, okay, well, maybe this is the right way.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's so cool. How do you take what you're learning about leadership, what you teach about leadership, and your retreats that you do, which I saw you have one coming up in April, by the way. I actually, those same exact dates, I have a 5-day local retreat with David G.
Okay.
Are you familiar with him at all?
No, I'm not. No.
David G. He's a meditation teacher also, and he's from California, but he's coming here to Rochester to run a 5-day local.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. It's like an 8-week course, but the last 5 days are in person.
Okay.
But yours looked awesome. I might actually have to put that on my calendar for the following year.
Great.
Seriously. So maybe I can convince my wife to come with me. She's the one that actually,
love to have you.
Yeah. She's actually the one that got me into a lot of mindfulness through her yoga and everything. And then I just took off with it. So she's been an inspiration, and you've been married for 28 years. So obviously you guys have inspired each other. How do you take your leadership that you're learning and bring it into your family for the past X amount of years? How does that roll over?
Well, sometimes well, and oftentimes not so well. I think some of the things that have worked well is, I'll start with core values. So when my wife, Emily, and I were initially married and had children, we didn't operate within a set of defined core values. Certainly they're there for all of us that have, spouses or families or whatnot, but we don't always define them. But when I started defining them within my company, I thought to myself, why don't I have family values, that are defined, that we're teaching the kids, and we're we're living, And so Emily and I sat down and we set, our core values for the company, and for the family.
Yeah.
And we started sharing them with the kids at a somewhat early age. And so we would just ask them questions, around different actions that were taking place, and did they fit within our family values. And now that my kids are much older, I see that has come to fruition. They do talk about our values, and they do challenge things, when there might be, actions that are taking place. They might say, that doesn't seem like that's like what our values are all about here, within our family, our mini family unit.
Yeah.
So, I think that's one way it's carried over. Another thing that did stick and was successful is my wife and I started meeting, kind of having a, somewhat formal regular meeting once every 4 to 6 weeks, which would have a, basically an agenda where we would talk about each other and what was happening and what was working and what wasn't working, what was going on with the kids, what's working, what's not working, what's going on with our finances, what's working, what's not working, looking at our budget, making sure that we're both in alignment with where we're going and why. And
can I ask you a question with that?
Yeah, sure.
Did you say, like you said, every 4 to 6 weeks? So did you save those conversations for then? So they didn't, a lot of times what happens in relationships, right, is you just keep bringing up the stuff over and over and over every day or every other day instead of just talking about it, right? You smug, it's true. Did you try and save it for those days?
It depended. I mean, this was a work in progress, by the way.
Sure.
So it wasn't like day one. This is how it went. But no, there were some things we might save for discussion, but other things, they're more timely. And so you need to have or you don't want things to fester or things of that nature. So you have to try to use good judgment.
Okay.
So that's a really good question though. The last thing that we would do is actually review our calendars, because we all have such busy lives these days. And so just making sure we were on the same page with what, was all going on between the two of us and the kids and where we need to be and all that kind of stuff. The last thing that comes to mind that I felt carried over and worked was we have a really strong vision at my company, and we have consistent goals, annual goals, a 3-year goal, a 10-year goals. And so I would have personal goals that I'd be going for in my career and in my life. But Emily didn't really know all that much about them. I'd share some of them here or there, and then I thought, one day I thought, I don't even know if these goals are in alignment with what Emily wants out of life, So we created a vision for the future together. It's a story that takes place in the future. In our case, the most recent one it goes till 2026.
Okay.
And, it's very vivid. So there's a lot of detail around what is happening on that date in 2026. And so we can see it in our mind's eye, and which we believe helps us move towards it in conscious and subconscious ways. And then we set our goals and we share them with each other so we can support each other and make sure that we're in alignment with our lives. Makes no sense if I want to spend all kinds of time in Colorado in the mountains snowboarding, and she wants to spend time in the beach in Florida at the same time of the year. We're not in alignment. We got to somehow figure that out.
So how do you figure that out? So when you guys are on different pages with some things, like, how do you figure it out? Is it a give and take? Is it how does that come up?
Yeah, I think it is a give and take for sure. I mean, relationships are about, part of what relationships are about are compromise and finding the right spot that suits you both, or being able to give, so to speak, in areas where you don't feel such a tight hold on, where you feel like you could give. And so, we never want to look back, meaning Emily and I never want to look back and say, I wish, I should have said this, or I wish I didn't give in on that because now my life isn't what I thought it could have been. That wouldn't be fair to her, and it wouldn't be fair to me because I don't want her to feel that way either. Yeah. And so, the more we can keep that dialogue going, the more likely we're going to be in alignment, and recognizing that things change in our lives. And, you don't anticipate certain things, and you grow in different ways, or you learn something new and it piques a different type of interest. And, or maybe going snowboarding, X number of days per year isn't as important as it was when you were in your 30s, now that you're in your 50s,
Yeah.
those kinds of things.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome, Rob. Thanks for sharing that. I'm noticing a common theme when I talk to individuals in healthy, passionate, good relationships, and it's actually having those designated days to meet. I've heard every week, I've heard every month. People do it whatever works for them and whatever point they are in a relationship. I'm so glad you brought that up. I want to ask you. You said manifesting, and that your third eye. In the past, because I totally believe in this and I do it myself. I've been doing it a lot more lately, but in the past, have you guys set like a 2020 or 2018 or 2016 vision and actually saw it come out, or saw a lot of it come into fruition?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah,
I
can you
think
give
all
me
the
like a
time.
specific example of that, if you don't mind?
Yeah. We knew that we wanted to, at some point in our lives, live in an area that had a lot of energy and a lot of diversity and a lot of that was vibrant. We raised our kids in a suburb of Detroit, and it's a calm place. There's not a lot of diversity, and we lived, in a home that served us so well for many, many years. But we knew at some point that we wanted to have some sort of different energy. And I'm trying to figure out how to make this story short, but I shared this. I have a vision and goals buddy. It's a really good friend of mine, Jeffrey Cafton, and we meet every 90 days at least to talk about each other's vision and goals, how we could support each other, et cetera. And we go on these bike rides when it's nice out here in Detroit. And he knew this about us. And one day we were doing a ride, and we came into the city of Detroit. And he goes, "Hey, come on over this way," which was kind of off the path of where we were going. And I was like, "What's going on? We're getting off path. What are you doing?" He goes, "Come on, just follow me." And he takes me over, and there's an empty construction site, or getting prepared for construction site. He goes, "This is your new home." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "This is your new home." And I said, "Okay." And so I thought about what he had to say, and I came back and I talked to Emily. I said, "Jeff took me on this crazy bike ride, and here's what happened." But my wife she had no interest in living in the city of Detroit. And no sooner did this happen, my wife said, "Yeah, I went on the website and this looks really interesting. Let's go check it out." And so we did. And next thing you knew, we were putting a deposit down to move into this development. Okay, so that sounds great from a manifestation standpoint. Yeah. But what happened is they canceled the project. And so we weren't moving to Detroit, but she kept moving forward. And she ended up finding us a place. And long story short, we ended up moving down here in the summer. And to me, this is a relevant story, especially because I grew up in the area, spent pretty much my whole life in the Detroit area. And going to Detroit, the city of Detroit, growing up here was a concerning thing for parents and for kids alike. It was a place that evoked some fear, and you would only go to certain destinations, say like a sports event or a concert or a place to go to dinner, but you wouldn't veer from the area. You wouldn't go on a walk around the town or anything like that. In the city, it's come so far nowadays. So the idea that we would be down in the city and living here and, moved from our home in this quiet suburb, all around the idea that we just wanted to be in a place that had a certain energy and diversity kind of added to the manifestation of the whole thing. And so I still actually amazed that we're down here living in the city.
Yeah.
So I don't
Wow.
know. Hopefully that wasn't too long of a story.
No, that's cool. That's great. How long have you guys lived in the city then
We
now?
just moved here this
Oh, that was
summer. So
summer, this
yeah,
summer. Okay.
this is why it's very relevant.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cause you said summer. I wasn't sure if you meant this one. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And there was that's great. That's perfect. There was a mentioning of values earlier that I wanted to go back and touch on. That how did you came up with values, core values for your family? Just like in business. And I know one of the most important pieces is if I can come into your company, Rob, and ask any of your employees what the vision is for the company, and if they can't say they don't know, it's probably not a good thing. There's something there that needs to be fixed, right?
Sure.
And so same thing with your family, like you said. How did you come up with those? Did you guys sit down together, all four of you? Did you and your wife sit together and come up with a list, write them down, put them on the wall, show
Hmm.
everybody, remind everyone? How did you, if you don't mind explaining a little bit of that process, that'd be awesome.
Emily and I worked on them. The kids were very young.
Okay.
And, we just tried to find words, emotions of things that were important to us that could describe, to the kids, into simple terms because they were young. We wanted it
Mm-hmm.
to be simple. And just things that felt right and weren't aspirational. We wanted to have it sort of that energy already, within us. And
Cool.
so that's how we came about it. And for us, I don't know why it wasn't all that hard for us. Not really
Yeah.
sure why, but it could be hard for some. Yeah.
No, I think you started early, right? So now how are they? Are they still developed with those values
Yeah.
at their
Yeah. We still, we still live by them.
Nice. That's awesome. You have a podcast too, right?
Yep.
You started April 2018. What's your podcast called?
The Do Nothing
The
podcast.
Do Nothing podcast. Yeah. We're like 20 minutes into this and I haven't even mentioned Do Nothing yet. I know in the intro I did, but yeah, the concept of do nothing, I love, and that's what your leadership retreat is about.
Yes.
But and I'm going to get into that a little more, but I wanted to ask, because April 2018 is pretty fresh, hasn't even been around a year yet. You've had
Right.
a lot of impactful guests on. I listened to a couple of them. What is one of the, like, I've been doing this since September, so I can remember too. So what is like one of the most impactful conversations or topics that came up in a conversation that you've had so far on your podcast that kind of might creep up subconsciously every now and then in your mind?
Well, I shared one from Thumpton Jimpa. One that I think about, a much lesser known person, Hamza Dahir, who has an amazing story. She was actually my first guest. And she has an amazing story of coming from Iraq, immigrating here from Iraq during the first Iraqi war, at which time I was in college watching it on television. And I remember that specifically. And to know that the two of us are now connected and we're friends. So we had that, prior to the podcast. But to have that come to light and to know that where I was and where she was, and to think how we came together through all that, it's still, just saying it to you right now, it kind of baffles my mind in a way. She was a kid over there and they were scared, as you could imagine, and what she all had to do to get here, and that our paths would cross and we would become friends, where I'm sitting in a dorm room in college watching this happen on TV.
Right.
It's baffling to me. And now she's the executive director of the Small Giants community. And she's essentially in charge of developing this community of all these thoughtful leaders and entrepreneurs that are making an impact on all their employees in a really positive way. I'm like, wow. She came all the way from there and look where she's at. And it baffles my mind. So
it's inspirational to say the least.
It is.
Yeah. Stories like that I can totally see why you would use that as the example for my question I asked, because
Yeah.
stories like that stick with us. Like, man, like if someone like going through all of that can become in a leadership position, helping others, doing in successful, like anybody can, right? No matter
It's
what
amazing.
situation you're in. That's in, while you're in your dorm room sitting there having a six pack, you're
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's so true.
well, that's so going away from the podcast, but I was really curious about that because we kind of are on the same page with a newer podcast.
Hmm.
Obviously, so do nothing. All right. I just want to ask you, like, not specific, just what is the do nothing? If you could explain to people why that's so important, what it is and what it's all about.
Well, I started my meditation practice about 15 years ago, and it was because I had a lot of stress and anxiety in my life. And what I realized along the way was that I wasn't showing up as the best leader that I could be, or person for that matter, but as it related to business, because do nothing, its focus has a lot to do with my business experiences. And um, and so I started to notice a difference. I noticed a shift in the way I was working with people, and it was a positive one. And I thought to myself, I'm in the entrepreneurial community, so I know so many entrepreneurs, and I see the same struggles that they have. And so I thought to myself, it doesn't need to be like this, and because it doesn't feel good to the person, the leader, the person in the leadership position, like myself,
Mhm.
and it doesn't feel good to the employees, the team members, and so nobody's winning. And so I just thought, this is a good subject. People ought to know about this. And back when I started this whole thing, it wasn't really as, you know, uh, it wasn't out there,
No.
it wasn't received the same way.
Yeah.
And so it was a harder subject to talk about and for people to not think it was kind of woo woo or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, and so, that's what really inspired me at the outset. Later on down the line, as I continued down this journey, and there were people kind of under the radar who would ask me frequently questions and show a little bit of interest, and you know um, that kind of thing. It started to become more widely recognized as a tool for slowing down and kind of um, you know really people started to understand the value of being in the present moment, you know and anyway, so to make a long story short, I decided to write a book about it. I was encouraged by a friend
Mm.
who really coined the phrase "do nothing." He was asking me about these retreats that I was going on, and he said, "What do you do on those retreats? You guys just sit around, do nothing?" And I just kind of laughed. I go, "That's hilarious." I said, "It might seem that way, but it's the hardest work that you could ever imagine, actually. But it seems like you're doing nothing, but you really aren't." And he goes, "You should write a book and you should call it 'Do Nothing.' And it's like the hardest work you'll ever do or something." And so I said, "That's funny." And then he said, "No, I'm serious. You should do that." And he planted a seed for me. And like 6 months later, I actually started doing it and used the name because I thought it was fun. He stuck with me. So I went
Yeah.
with that. So it kind of grew from the book and my passion about these retreats and wanting to share the impact of how impactful a retreat can be. When you, especially nowadays with all the uh, things coming at us, it's at lightning speed. I don't know how we can keep up. It's not humanly possible. All the emails and social media and places we got to be and things we got to do, and you know your listeners get it, you get it, and it's hard to find this time where you can just stop and put your phone, your mobile devices, your emails, and you can put it all aside and be in probably what might be one of the scariest places that you can be, which is in your mind. Just you and your thoughts. Because we're not doing that. We're not with our thoughts. But we're constantly thinking. We're all over the place. And you all know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think we create a lot of distractions so we don't have to think about our
That's
thoughts
right.
much or confront our insecurities or our fears as much, right? So we scroll or we watch a Netflix program or we,
That's
you
right.
know, whatever. Yeah, that makes total sense. And are these silent retreats you're talking about?
Yes. So I go on 7 to 10 day silent retreats per year now. And I've been doing that for, I think, 5, maybe 6 years. And sometimes I go, usually one time per year, I'll go on one that is teacher led. And then one time I'll go by myself. But I was taught how to do that. I don't recommend just jumping in and doing that on your own. And I just found them to be so valuable for many reasons. One that I like to really share is you start to really hone in on the feeling of what it is like to be in the present moment, because being away for 3, 5, 7, 10 days or longer, depending on the person, you start, your thoughts are ever present and going at 1,000,000 miles an hour, as it would be expected. We're human. But at a certain point, it actually starts to slow down because it's kind of all come up. And then what's below the surface started to come up. And it starts to slow down a little. And you start to really recognize what the present moment feels like. And it feels really good. And so then you know what the feeling is. And that's practicing. And I like to share that because, or I like to share a couple examples with people that can be relatable. One is sports and one is music.
Okay.
So for those that relate to sports, I'll use a basketball analogy or example. There's the player that's usually the best one on the team, like LeBron James, or Michael Jordan or something like that. And those two are the last ones in the gym. They're shooting 3-pointers or free throws until their hands have calluses all over them, or they won't leave until they hit 100 in a row or whatever their marker is. Mm-hmm. And when the big game is on the line and all the crowd is shouting and going crazy and hoping they miss or hoping they make it, they don't get caught up. It all gets tuned out. You hear that universally from the best players. It's all tuned out. They know exactly what they need to do without even thinking about it because they practice so much. Same thing with the musician. They play the piano or the trumpet and they play until their fingers have calluses and they know every last note and they perfect it. And we all know what that sounds like when it's really good. We all know that as listeners. Mm-hmm. And when they get on the big stage and the whole audience is there, I mean, it could be a whole stadium with 80,000 people. And they hit every last note. Oh, that's because they've been practicing into the wee hours. And so for us, the big game is each day. It's when we communicate with each other, both through words and through how we show up physically with people. And that takes practice. Paying attention takes practice. When our kids are talking to us, but we have emails coming through and the TV's on and, how do you stay super focused on what the child is saying or what your spouse is saying and you're truly with them? It takes practice. And I learned, for me, going on a retreat taught me what it feels like. So I know immediately the feeling's not there. I know what it feels like. So I bring my attention back to the subject, the person. And those people feel it. They know when you are with them and when you're not. And we know it too. You know when you're talking to somebody, when they're distracted and when they're not. You just know it. You feel it. Have you ever had somebody say to you, "Oh, I'm listening. Oh yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I know you're listening and I know you hear me." but you're not with me. And that's a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. That's good. So you going on these retreats now after 5-6 years of doing them in a row, are you learning something new about yourself, or are you doing it to be consistent, like you said, like the Michael Jordan, LeBron, just so that, you're staying on top of your game, your A game?
Yeah, I need to, for me personally, I need to consistently remind my mind of what it feels like. And our minds are, we do forget. We do forget.
Mm-hmm.
That's natural. That's been proven. And so going back and reintroducing your mind to that reinforces it. And so that's why I do it. And that's why I find it one of the best uses of time. I would like to do it more.
Sure. Wow.
I try to do as much as I can. I always encourage anybody, do as much as you can. The more you practice, the more you'll understand the feeling. The less you practice, the less you'll understand the feeling, but at least you're practicing, so you're starting to understand it. So there's no bad in any of it. It's all good. It's all good.
It's all good.
I'm never going to be as, somebody who goes away for 90 days or a whole year or years. I'm not going to be there. So, I just do the best I could do. And that's what I always encourage each person. Do the best you could do.
Yeah, exactly. And in whatever point of life you're in, right? So
exactly.
Yeah. Like you earlier, when you said you try to go to bed by, I think 8:30, 8:45, that would leave me and my wife like 30 minutes, maybe 20 minutes at the end of the night to like talk. So mine's 10 o'clock. I have a 1.5-year-old and a 4-year-old. 4.5.
Absolutely.
So, that depends on what point you are in life and what
stage in life. You're right. So true.
And yet it just all takes with, like you said, change. Like you mentioned it earlier, things change, even your plans, like life comes at you, you have to adapt. And I love all that.
It's a journey, isn't it? We're just going down all these different paths, and there's different, decision points or times of life, like you mentioned, and that takes us down that path. And, I think the awareness of where you're at in life is another thing that comes from, a practice is really being in tune with the feeling. A lot of times we're in our head, but what about our heart? And really being in tune with where I'm at in this part of my journey, and knowing that this will pass, and being in tune with when it starts to pass and what does it mean now.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, just a small, simple example would be like have you heard of Mind Valley podcast?
No.
Okay. What about Lewis Ho's School of Greatness?
Yes.
Lewis. Okay. So he has, I don't know, 1 billion downloads or something now, right?
Yeah.
So what you just said would be an example where you started your podcast in April 2018. If you're feeling frustrated and you're feeling envious of Lewis, who has 1 billion and you only have, a few thousand, you're comparing your chapter 2 to his chapter 34 of his podcast journey, right?
Yeah.
So you have to understand, like you were just saying, you have to get out of your head and your feelings and realize, oh, okay, this is where I'm at in my journey right now. This is how I feel, but here's how I should be feeling, or here's what really this means to me. Is that kind of what you're?
Yeah. And you bring up such a good point, because I think that there's so many aspects to what you said. First is just the constant comparison of where I should be versus where I am. You are where you are right here, right now. That's where you are. And that's all you can deal with at this moment. And so that's important to acknowledge. And then the struggles that you will incur, because you will incur them, that's part of life. Those are the lessons and the wisdom that you gain. And in some ways, the tests to say, I'm not suggesting that you want this, but Justin, do you want 1 billion downloads or whatever it is? Do you really want that? Because it's going to be a heck of a journey if you do. You're going to make sacrifices along the way. They're not going to be breaking down the door, most likely. Although hopefully they do, and it isn't all that, but usually it's the latter. Usually there's a lot of tough lessons along the way. And those things are, to me, it's the universe saying, do you really want this? Do you?
That's cool. That's good stuff. My favorite point of everything you just said was that, like, is that what you want? Like, is that what you, and that if you ask yourself that question, that's good. It's really good. Huh. I like to make these about an hour or so for my podcast. I'm going to throw it for a random loop because I have two things, but the randomness that I'm going to throw out is, we've been talking all this mindfulness and stuff, but I was listening to a couple podcasts and you mentioned in one of them your entrepreneurship operating system. I didn't want to leave this conversation without asking you about that. EOS. If you could just like give me the breakdown of what's going on there.
It's essentially was a process created by a person named Gino Wickman.
Okay.
And he created a process so entrepreneurs could get control of their businesses and have a way of running their businesses, driven by their core values, where everybody in the organization understands what they are and lives by them in their heart, not in their head, like we were talking about before. It's just intuitive, it's things like having the right people within your organization, people that adhere to the core values and get it and want it and have the capacity to do it, which means they get your culture, they want the job, and they're really good at what they do. Because if those three things don't align, it's not going to work. It's not going to work well. You're not going to be a highly successful organization if those aren't there. It's things like having the right metrics in place so you can look at scorecards and say, we're on track, we're off track. If we're off track, what do we need to do about it? And so you could be proactive with things as opposed to being reactive. It's about having clarity of vision, like we were talking about with our families. It's having a vision for the future and traction on how to get there, through a really solid 1 year plan that is clearly defined as to what's going to be accomplished in the next 12 months, and then breaking it down into shorter sprints of 90 days. So every business quarter, which is 90 days, you have 3 to 5 things that you're focused on that are moving you towards your 1 year goals. And, all these things, which kind of sound, if you hear them, you go, oh yeah, of course. Oh yeah, of course. So many entrepreneurs just don't have this in place. And so he just created a system to kind of put it all in place, make sure that everybody was communicating well with each other, always on the same page. And it became a game changer for us, really.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where can our listeners, or even myself, find more information on this?
So there's a great book called Traction. It's a best-selling book, and that would be the best place. And then I believe the website is eosworldwide.com, or if you Google it, if it's not .com, you'll find it.
Okay. Awesome. That's good. I like that. So I was curious. I saw it a couple of times come up, and I had to ask it. So thanks for sharing that. And you're right. We hear that a lot. Like I hear, creative. And actually Sunday, my grandparents, my wife's parents, sorry, not my grandparents, my in-laws are coming over, and they are babysitting our kids. We're taking them away, and we're actually creating our family vision. My wife and I, so we're doing our individual ones. She's going to vision board. I'm going to do mine. And then we're going to talk together about, 2020 and beyond. So I wanted to mention that earlier because I love that you're saying that. And this is the first time we're ever doing it together.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just because I've heard so many people like yourself and others say it. So
Mm-hmm.
the conversation
May I share a resource with you?
Yeah,
Not
please
necessarily
do.
for you, but
Yeah.
maybe for your listeners or maybe
Yeah.
for you. I learned the best visioning I learned was from one of my friends and mentors, Ari Weinsweg. Ari started a deli of all things back in the 80s that became quite famous, Zingerman's Deli. It's in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And he became really excellent at visioning. And he has a book, and I believe it's called The Power of Visioning. And he also has these little pamphlets. So they're about visioning, which are easier to read. And in our time-lax society, you could just get this. And he really outlines this way of writing this vision for the future that is inspiring, realistic, yet stretches you, but where it's taking place in the future. And so you feel it's taking place in the future, but it's as if it's right now when you read it. And so you feel it. It's like a story that you're just like, you're right there right now, but it's actually in the future. And so that's been a very positive resource for myself, and maybe others would find it useful.
How do you spell his first name?
It's Ari, but the best place would be zingtrain.com. I believe it's zingtrain.com, but if you Google Zingtrain, you will find it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Any resources, any tools to guide you through that process is always helpful.
Yeah.
Saves time, makes it more powerful, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
When you have that stuff, especially from somebody that a lot of times I find this myself when we do something new, or we're trying something that we're like, oh, I know I need to do this, and we do it, to learn from somebody else that has already gone through it successfully.
Yeah.
And use tools like that is so much more powerful and saves us so much more time. So I'm really glad you did that. Whereas 2 years ago, Rob, I might've been like, nah, I'm good. I'll figure it out myself. I'll do it. Which,
great.
As a hard-headed, egotistical male, I mean, you could probably understand that at some point in your life, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So breaking down those walls and accepting that kind of stuff has been pretty transformational. So I'm glad you shared that. Thank you.
Sure.
Now, the one I ask, I saw your favorite book, by the way. I have to ask this too. So obviously I did my research, Rob, and Andrew Harrison was the one that referred me to you.
Yes.
How did you guys know?
I was mentioning to you prior that I have a very good friend in Rochester named David Mamano, and David introduced me to Andrew.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So through my extra research, your book recommendation, one of them, or maybe the number one, is Viktor Frankl's meaning of
Man's Search for Meaning.
Man's Search for Meaning. It was one of the books I read this year.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And I would say it was really good. It was probably the hardest book to read. I want to ask that, did you find it like you needed to read it twice kind of thing, or read it slower, or is that just me?
That's a good question, actually, because I've read it many times.
Okay.
So I don't recall the first time I read it and how I felt. I do know the first time I read it, it impacted me immediately. It was very impactful to me. So that part I do remember.
Okay. And which way was it impactful?
Well, it got me thinking a lot about the mind, and how one can take a perspective in life, even given the gravest of situations. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes, at that time in my life especially, but still today, I get caught up in everything going on, and I don't like the way that went, and it's like, could I get a little perspective?
Yeah.
I mean,
that's good.
oh, sorry. Please.
It's refreshing to hear from someone like yourself who goes on 2 retreats a year, has been practicing meditation for a while, has successful business, been in Forbes, all this, married for 28 years, beautiful kids that are going on to do great things, that you still get frustrated and you still, you still have those anxiety moments and don't like certain ways things. It is refreshing to hear that because we're human, right? We still, no matter how much work we do, we're
Yeah.
still going to have those moments. So
Yeah.
appreciate that from you.
When I teach meditation, many times people say, I've tried it and I just can't. Oh, geez. So sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay.
When I teach meditation, I have people who say to me, I just can't seem to get into this place where, I lose all my thoughts and I still have all this frustration after and things of that nature. And I just like to remind people that you're human and that's normal. And that will be my life's journey as long as I'm here on this earth, in this life. It's never going to change. That's just all part of it. It's just my ability to deal with it is going to be different.
Yeah, that's
it's all about
beautiful.
how we deal with it.
Yeah.
Viktor Frankl talks about this moment between stimulus and response. And in that moment, we have a choice. And the choice that we get to make can change. It is about how happy we want to be and how we show up for other people. We get to make that choice. It's a millisecond choice. It's when one of my kids says something that, gets me real caught up and edgy, and I might want to respond. But there's this millisecond when you practice where you say, I'm feeling this. Hold on. What does this really mean? But this is all in a millisecond. It's not in, minutes or out, it's a millisecond. And so you take a breath, you come back to the present moment, and you put things in perspective, and at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter all that much, most likely.
Right.
And so it changes the way you show up. Doesn't mean you don't deal with it. Doesn't mean you don't ignore it. It doesn't mean you don't, it still doesn't agitate you, but it's about how you show up.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you practice longer, does that millisecond feel like it's like 4 or 5 seconds? So you have a little bit more space to react?
Maybe, or maybe it's just like when you shoot the free throw or you play the notes. You don't think.
Yeah.
You don't think. You don't have to think about it because you know the feeling. You instantaneously know what's happening.
Yeah, that's good. So if you could go, the last question I want to end this with for you is if you could go back to your 18-year-old self, you at 18, and your 18-year-old self was willing to listen, they're willing to read something. Is there like a quote or something you would say to them, or an excerpt that you would write that you would want yourself to know at 18?
Okay, so is there a quote or an excerpt?
Well, I'm sorry, I should have said that a little better. So if you could go back and tell your 18-year-old self anything, what would it be?
Okay. I would let my 18-year-old self know that this is a journey and it takes time to unfold. Approach every day with love, because at the end of the day, it's all that matters. Everything else will fall into place the way it should. The decisions that we make are always the right decisions. They're always the right decisions. And when we can have confidence in that, and coming back to remembering that it's all about love, love for each other, love for the wonderment of this world. It takes a little of the pressure off.
Awesome. And ending with love is a great way to end this episode. Thank you so much, Rob.
Thank you.
Seriously, I really, really appreciate it. Grateful for you to come on.
I'm
and talk
grateful
about
that
this.
you have me. I'm humbled. I really am. Thank you for having me.
All right. Look at that. We did it. Hopefully you had some fun on there and had some.
Oh yeah, no, that was a really great conversation. Thank you so much, Justin.
Good, Rob. Now,
And I'm sorry that just happened, by the way, that my FaceTime went off. Did you see that?
no, nothing happened on my end.
Oh, no. Okay. That's why I said I was sorry, because my FaceTime on my Mac started going off and I should have turned that off. So sorry about that.
Nothing happened here. So we're good.
Okay.
Well, I would say probably like 3 times my kids ran, like you can see back here, my kids are usually here. So they'll like run.
I didn't see that. I wish I would have actually.
No, it didn't happen on this one. It didn't happen on this, but it's happened in the past. I have a cover and sometimes I forget to put it up. And today, luckily they're away with my
so
wife.
Funny.
But yeah, 4 and 2, you never know what you're going to get.
Of course. That's beautiful though.
It is.
I love that these days that you can be in business and have a setup like you have where kids can run behind and you're doing work and, all that kind of stuff. I feel like nowadays there's so much more openness to just life happening around us. And it's so cool. I think that, you can build a business the way you're doing and have kids running around in the background. It's how it should be.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's how it should be. However, there is a lot to learn and a lot of struggle to go through before you can actually make it work.
That's so true.
I mean,
it's called boundaries.
Yes, boundaries. I used to have a sign on the door that was like "stop and go." Now they kind of know. So
now they get it.
Yeah.
Don't bug Dad when he's got the headphones on.
Exactly. And actually, I'll let you go soon. But with my wife, it was one of the biggest struggles. Like, hey, honey, you have to realize that I'm here, but I'm not here. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because like, hey, can you help me with this? No, I'm, yes and no most of the time. So, because work needs to be done too. But exactly. The beauty of it is I love being able to just go out. I just heard him come home. Actually, this worked out perfect. Just go out, like hug them, hang out with them, have lunch with them, and then come back to work in like an instant. It's so cool to be able to do that. So
it's really unique that we could do that these days.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Can you give me that? Actually, I have the contact. Do you want to like him personally? Do you have an email or something you can
David?
do an intro? Yeah, David.
Yeah, I'll make a email to the two of you. So I'll just introduce the two of you.
Okay. I'll put
on an email. Will that be okay?
Yeah, you have my email, but I'll throw it in this chat here too.
Okay. That's cool.
Thank you. I got to get to your level someday where I have an assistant doing a lot of my stuff.
It's helpful. I will say that I made an investment in that, and I'm sure that's where you're headed. So yeah,
that's part of my vision. So yeah, hopefully we'll see
part of the vision, right?
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, man. I'll let you go.
Thank you. I appreciate it. All the best to you and to your